Well, this is just a thing with the right. They're edgelords, and if they see something that doesn't make sense, that's less than optimal, that they think is inauthentic, that they think is lying, they mock it relentlessly. And Israel is not alone here. It's kind of sad, but this is sort of like how I found out that Nick Fuentes got interviewed by Tucker Carlson. This isn't specifically the tweet, but people accusing me of anti-Semitism in my replies on Twitter. And again, I don't block people. In my opinion, if you're going to accuse me of anti-Semitism for making objectively good takes, then there's a problem with you, and I'll probably just make fun of you. If you're not using logic, if you're using logical fallacies, ad hominem attacks, you just become content for my followers like you. And, if you like that, hit like, subscribe, Rasmussen_poll, drop a comment. We're trying to get as many people on this stream as possible because, like I said, I think I'm going to come at this from a very different angle. And I also have polling that nobody else has in the industry, because that's what we do here. We talk about the news framed with the public opinion polls that tell us what America thinks. And that's important here because everybody seems to be wanting to tell America what to think when it comes to Israel and not actually asking what they think. And I think it'll be very clear. I mean, but here's just an example. I posted something totally unrelated to Israel. What do I get back? Oh, you're going to blame the Jews. Well, no, the only thing I'm blaming the Jews for is being horribly bad at public relations. That's the problem here. That's specifically what we're going to discuss. Now, this is what happened basically. Nick Fuentes, we'll talk about a little bit about him and who he is. Did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and you know how Tucker does that. He just sort of drops the tweet, but this was trending. 782,000 people tweeted about Nick Fuentes. And you can see, I mean, it's as much as the NVIDIA stock. It's almost as much as Wikipedia. The same day that Elon Musk announced Grokpedia and dropped the beta, there's some really big things here that Nick Fuentes was trending as much as on Twitter. So it was a really big thing. I don't even know who some of these people are, but I guess they're pretty big and important. South Korea, 1.3 million. So Nick Fuentes was almost trending as much as a nation state. I don't really know what's going on there. But if you just search on Twitter for Fuentes, you'll get an idea of like what people were talking about. Tucker and Nick took a picture together. They look happy. They look nice. Then some people like this, Nick Fuentes wants to use the story of the Virgin Mary to seemingly justify pedophilia. Notice how some of these people said nothing when Pat Bet David hosted Nick Fuentes on the show a month ago, but now everybody's psychotic. Yeah, that's an old one. Here's Nick. We don't need permission from foreign agents and paid shills to talk with each other about what's best for our own country. Yeah, that's probably true. It was just a discussion between two people. Brandon Tatum. Oh, interesting. He's piling on. So Brandon Tatum is clearly on the other side of the spectrum from Nick Fuentes. Brandon Tatum took an Israel-funded trip over to Israel and did a lot of PR for them, a lot of photo ops. Nick Fuentes, Erica Kirk is a spook. Erica is a plant. I don't know. But it's all discussion about like this conversation and what he talked about. Now, here's the link. I watched it. It's pretty good. It'll give you an idea of who Nick is. But again, we're like taking Nick at face value for what Nick says he is. And Tucker doesn't really challenge him too much. And it was a good conversation. There were a lot of points covered: identity politics, Nick Fuentes' background, how the Daily Wire radicalized him and tried to take him down. That's actually one of the reasons that Nick has kind of like the viewpoints he does, is because Daily Wire really sort of like tipped their hand and came after him for the anti-Semitism angle before he was really anybody. And so Nick he's a young guy. I think he's like 28. He's been doing a show, I think, since like 18, dropped out of college, founded his own show. And because of his takes, which if I could sanitize, I would say don't shy away from white identity politics, white Christian identity politics. That's why he's made a name for himself. It isn't necessarily Jew hate. I'm sure he said a lot of Jew hate stuff. And though also I think a lot of people like to villainize him and take him out of context. I really don't know. I don't follow him, so I'm not going to opine on it. And in my opinion, they did talk a lot about Israel, but I didn't think that was the most interesting part of the discussion. So that's not what this stream is going to be. We're actually going to talk about Nick and what he said in this conversation in a different part of tonight's show, where we talk about a topic other than the Middle East. And I use this as a segue to talk about all of our Middle East polling because of all of the backlash that happened just because two human beings sat down and talked to each other. Two human beings that people on Twitter are very upset about and often, angle a lot of attacks at. It's kind of weird. So where we're starting with is the Times of Israel and how they responded to the Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson interview. Tucker Carlson, and I'm not going to react too much. I just want you to let these words wash over you. This is a pretty big news site over there. Not really sure what it's equivalent to, maybe something like the Washington Post. I don't know. Tucker Carlson discusses these Zionist Jews with avowed anti-Semite Nick Fuentes. Former Fox News host signals broad alignment with Holocaust deniers' views against Israel, claims Christian Zionists are seized by a brain virus. And if you can understand what they talked about, it was like the idea of how Christianity basically doesn't have this idea of inherited sin. Like, just because you come from an identity group doesn't mean that you have the culpability for anything that your ancestors did. And they contrasted, the two of them agreed, contrasted Christianity with Judaism because of the way that Israel treats Palestinians. And they made a compelling point, but they disagreed on other things. And this was a discussion. This is where people compare each other's viewpoints and arrive at shared common ground. I'll leave it to you to watch the video and determine if you think that they arrived at reasonable common ground. In my opinion, the places where they agreed, I thought made sense. But we're talking about how the Times of Israel is portraying it. And again, I'm not making any statements about anything that Nick Fuentes said in the past. Tucker Carlson wanted to know, what does Nick Fuentes actually believe? Everybody's going to be like, you're a Nazi. You just like Nick Fuentes, the former Fox News personality mused on his show Tuesday. But then I'm like, I don't think Fuentes is going away. Ben Shapiro tried to strangle him in the crib in college, and now he's bigger than ever. He is bigger than ever. He's got over 700,000 Twitter followers, I believe, and now 50,000-ish live concurrent viewers every day. God, I would love to have that many viewers, because I think, quite frankly, I probably have more unique content than Nick Fuentes does, but whatever. So Carlson invited the avowed anti-Semite and white nationalist live streamer onto his online talk show. There, the two had a friendly conversation about the Jews and whether it was right to blame them for everything. That's not really what they talked about. And Fuentes, whose own platform has only grown in the wake of the assassination of conservative arch rival Charlie Kirk, made clear what he believes. Asked who in the conservative movement needed to be taken down, he responded, these Zionist Jews. The sit-down, which had been rumored for weeks, carries implications for the growing popularity of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel voices on the right. Both men have followings in the millions, and Carlson has maintained close ties to President Donald Trump's orbit, even as he becomes a vociferous critic of Israel and helped platform Holocaust revisionists. When you hear the word platform, that's a very leftist word. It's like you're not allowed to talk to somebody. That's called gatekeeping. That is not a tool of like Western logos. You didn't hear Plato turn people away and not have a dialectic with them because of who they were. It was all about the value of the thoughts that they brought together with intellectual honesty, trying to, again, share information and change people's minds, arrive at common ground. Fuentes, meanwhile, has launched a far-right attack on mainstream conservatives using anti-Semitism as his chief plank. That's not really his chief plank, though. He thinks they're a problem, but his chief plank is trying to prevent the erosion of Western culture that founded America based on white Christianity. And again, we're not arguing about that. We're arguing about the validity of what is being claimed in this article. An ideology that an increasing number of young conservative operatives are also embracing. On YouTube, the top comments under the 2-hour episode were rife with anti-Semitic memes. Well, this is just a thing with the right. They're edgelords, and if they see something that doesn't make sense, that's less than optimal, that they think is inauthentic, that they think is lying, they mock it relentlessly. And Israel is not alone here. Many other things are getting mocked, and it's been that way for a long time. That's kind of just what young men do. And I can understand how that upsets the Times of Israel, and I do not condone it. And Tucker Carlson also called it out specifically and condemned it. That's not mentioned in here. Even as he signaled broad alignment with Fuentes' view on Israel, again, no mention of the fact that Tucker Carlson did draw some pretty clear lines. Carlson gently sought to distinguish himself from his guest's more overt anti-Semitism. I'm not that interested in the Jews, but I'm very interested in the foreign policy question. This is true. Carlson said at one point, bringing up his fingers for air quotes. Later, he told Fuentes, the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Okay, this isn't, in my opinion, the crux of the argument. Like, I just don't believe that, and I never will, period. And second, then it becomes the way to discredit. That's when I was like, this guy's a Fed. So he was calling Nick Fuentes a Fed, I think, specifically because of how he framed the argument. At least that's what the Times of Israel is claiming. That's not really my recollection of it. I think Tucker was calling Fuentes a Fed because he perceived that Nick was going after people who Tucker thought were full-throated advocates of the America First agenda, when it turned out they were people that disavowed Nick Fuentes or attacked him. In response, the young man who opens his America First online shows with animated depictions of Jewish conspiracies outlined his own core belief that neoconservatism, an ideology he opposes, is Jewish in nature because it prioritizes allegiance to Israel over traditional conservative principles. Well, that's legitimately debatable. And I don't know what the answer is because I didn't define the term neoconservatism. But a case could be made. As far as the Jews are concerned, you cannot actually divorce Israel and the neocons and all of those things that you talk about from Jewishness, ethnicity, religion, identity, Fuentes told Carlson. While some Jews do oppose Israel, he acknowledged, among his enemies in conservatism, I see Jewishness as the common denominator. I don't remember that quote. Maybe he said that. Fuentes continued, they're a stateless people. They're unassimilable. They resist assimilation for thousands of years. And I think that's a good thing. And now they have this territory in Israel. There's a deep religious affection for the state. So this is when Tucker Carlson tried to draw a line and say, well, why do you have to make it about Israel? Can't you make it about all countries? And all countries shouldn't have influence over Americans. And then Nick Fuentes went on with this argument to try to explain why there's something very specific in this case about Israel. There's a deep religious affection for the state. It's bound up in their identity. Modern neoconservatism, he said, stemmed from Jewish leftists who were mugged by reality when they saw the surprise attack in the Yom Kippur War. Fuentes insisted he doesn't hate all Jews, not to be that guy and say that thing, but my best friend is a Jewish person. He said, also claiming his assistant is Jewish, yada, yada. He then went on to blend his understanding of Jewish American anxieties, some of which have been articulated by leading Jewish communal figures, with the dual loyalty trope. But then Tucker Carlson said, well, I think that's the most obvious thing on earth. 80% of people would probably support that we shouldn't have people in positions of leadership who have dual loyalties. But the Times of Israel calls it a trope. If you're a Jewish person in America, it's sort of rational self-interest politically to say, I'm a minority, I'm a religious, ethnic minority. This is not really my home. My ancestral home is Israel, Fuentes said. They have this international community across borders, extremely organized, that is putting the interests of themselves before the interests of their home country. I don't think that's controversial. Even beyond Israel, Fuentes also sought to paint Judaism as incompatible with European tradition to which Americans' modern right aspires. They hate the Romans because the Romans destroyed the temple, he said. We don't think that as Americans and white people. And I don't know. Like, I don't study this stuff, but that could be true. To hear Fuentes tell it, his radicalization was a story of first being taken in by, before later rebelling against influential Jewish conservatives, the Daily Wire. Israel was his breaking point, he insisted, and Mark Levin. Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and Dennis Prager were his right wing heroes in high school, Fuentes said. He would parrot Shapiro talking points in debates and was a member of a Facebook group for young fans of PragerU. As a college freshman, in 2017, he fell into the orbit of the Daily Wire, Shapiro's media company, after a debate against his school's progressive student body president went viral. Fuentes would soon drop out of college to pursue conservative media full time. Yeah, like this just rehashes sort of the background. Let's see how they sum this up, because I want to get on to the polling. But you get the idea. You know, this is laced with a very, like this has some bias to it for sure. We do need to be right wing. We do need to be Christian. We do, on some level, need to be pro white, he said, not to the exclusion of everybody else, but recognizing that white people have a special heritage here as Americans. And this is where we're at. So the problem is, and somebody tweeted this today, is that Tucker mainstreamed Nick Fuentes. And that's, again, sort of leftist speak, where it's like, okay, if you talk to somebody, you're guilty of platforming them. But I think the truth is that Nick Fuentes has actually had a comeback and has been a controversial figure that, because we have Twitter now, increasingly has mainstreamed himself. And he wouldn't have gotten to where he was today if some of what he said resonated with people because of the current dialogue surrounding Israel, which I'm going to prove to you with polling is not good and needs to be better. And what they're doing here is trying to take the aspects of Nick Fuentes that are damaging, and of course there are some, and try and let a little bit of that mud splatter on Tucker Carlson. There's been an online campaign to try and discredit Tucker Carlson, calling him Tucker Carlson because people have alleged he's taken money from Qatar. I don't think his personal finances need that kind of money. And if you hear him talk, like, I don't know, there's a lot of people that would say things that Tucker Carlson said, and I'm not sure what the context is, to prove that he supports things like Sharia law. But if you hear him talk about Christianity in this interview, there were a lot of things with Nick Fuentes that they shared common ground, and they were objectively good takes. And obviously, Nick Fuentes was moderating himself somewhat, sure. But the problem is that he is here to stay. He's not going away. It's growing, and their tactics are suboptimal.